Hello everybody and welcome back. At the end of last video I talked about the alternation of generations and mentioned that it has some major implications with how plants evolved when they got to land, and in this video I will talk about exactly what those implications are, starting with the most basic group of plants, which are called bryophytes. So, when plants first get onto land, they find a very different environment than they experienced in the water. So, different conditions on land versus water. And this ends up providing many opportunities, but it also causes two big problems. And then there is one relatively more minor problem. One small problem. So, with the bryophytes, these plants are mosses, hornworts, and liverworts. And all of these plants are quite small. And the reason they're so small is because they don't have any ability to transport water through themselves. So, without water transport, no water transport, they don't have any way to stay wet unless the entire plant is in water. So, prone to dehydration. And that is why they almost always occur in wet environments or shady environments where they will not be dehydrated by the sun, so wet and or shaded habitats. Now, with mosses, the alternation of generations, unlike in green algae, the gametophyte and sporophyte are visibly different. So, different gametophyte and sporophyte. In these group of plants, the gametophyte is green, or often green, and it is fluffy, so is green and fluffy. So when you see a patch of green moss, that is the moss gametophyte, rather than being the sporophyte like you'll find later. In these group of plants, the sporophyte is usually fairly small and on a stick. So, spore. The sporophyte is not green. Sporophyte is brown or black. And it depends upon the gametophyte for food. So this is called a gametophyte dominant plant. And the reason mosses are so small and so limited in their habitat is because they, again, haven't solved either problem of dehydration or of being able to reproduce in habitats that are not wet. So, when you look to the plant that first solved these problems, this category is ferns and fern allies. So, ferns plus allies have solved one problem, have solved dehydration problem. And what the dehydration problem solution entails is vascular tissues. So, what this means is that in ferns you see the first appearance of roots, xylem, and phloem. And these two together are what creates wood. So, ferns are also the first plants to have woody tissue. Though most ferns don't have wood, so you would be calling them herbaceous plants. So all mosses are herbaceous plants, and most ferns are. But once again, the ferns have solved the problem with a fairly major innovation by being able to reach into the water, reach into the ground and search for water. So this is why ferns are much taller than moss. And while we don't have very many super tall ferns anymore, some fern allies called horsetails used to reach truly impressive sizes back when the dinosaurs were still walking the earth. You could get about 18 meters tall, I think, in some species. But they still have the other problem, where they need wet environments to reproduce because they spawn, similar to how fish work and so on. But another major thing in the ferns is that the fern gametophyte is small, while the part of the fern that is tall and has all the fronds is the sporophyte. So the sporophyte in ferns is dominant. Mostly. This isn't always the case, as sometimes the gametophyte is able to live on its own for at least a while, although in other cases it depends on fungi to be able to feed it. So, like, in the aquarium hobby, you'll find something called a Soswassertang that, I hope I pronounced that correctly, that is the large fern gametophyte that for some reason never forms the sporophyte stage. It's entirely aquatic, reproduces by breaking pieces off itself, and is generally an example of a transition period. However, while ferns and their allies did end up solving the problem of dehydration, they did not solve the reproduction problem. So, need water to in most cases. And the problem of needing water to reproduce was not solved until a Another huge invention was made, which was the seeds. So the first seed plants did not have flowers and would include conifers like pine trees and spruce and all their friends, as well as things like ginkgo trees. These plants are true trees. They have a woody trunk that forms rings. And this group of plants is called the gymnosperms. Which equals naked seeds. And this refers to the fact that they do not have any fruit coverings of their seeds, unlike the proper flowering plants do. Although some of them, like juniper plus yew, have adopted fake fruits. So, among the gymnosperms, every single one of them is a tree equals has woody tissue, and there have not been herbs, no herbs for millions of years. The last herbaceous conifers went extinct a very, very long time ago, and there are only about a few, maybe 1,000 or 2,000 species of gymnosperms in total, so it's not a very widespread group of plants. However, you may be wondering what the sporophyte and gametophyte are like, so sporophyte is the tree, and the gametophyte has been reduced further into pollen grains. At least that's the male gametophyte. The female gametophyte stays in the parent plant until such time as the male gametophyte reaches it. And this solves the problem of needing wet areas to reproduce, because a seed can last a very long time. And during the seed growth, so the sporophyte feeds the gametophyte, and this means that since the gametophyte can't get water by its own, but the sporophyte can, it is no longer bound to needing wet areas for reproduction purposes. However, the one issue with this is that they are wind-pollinated. With very few exceptions, and wind-pollinated is not efficient, because so many millions of pollen grains are wasted at coating roads and houses and all that sort of thing, causing allergies, when they could be arriving on the other plants and being used for seeds. So this is both a major problem solved, but the efficiency problem still hasn't. In that, you have to look at flowers. So, flowering plants emerged somewhat after the gymnosperms did. Most recent group of plants and also the most successful. There are about 391,000 species of flowering plants, equals 94% of all plants on Earth. So, since flowers use usually an insect or some other animal to transfer pollen, they need a great deal less of it in order to be fertilized and reproduce. So, there are some wind-pollinated flowering plants like wind-pollinated oaks, ragweed, nettles, and so on, but the majority is animal pollinated. This is also where true fruits appear, and botanically this is the ovary of a flower. So, while we think of fruits as something sweet to eat, in nature this is not usually the case, and they can be dry and crumbly in many cases, or even explosive in others. But the fruits also provide a huge incentive for animal spreading seeds. Often, and there are two major categories of these, which are monocots and dicots. So, I hope you enjoyed this video. In the next video, I will talk about monocots and dicots and how they differ, as well as the shape of leaves, structure of leaves, structure of fruits, and the other last bits of information that will be required before I can start talking about individual plant species and cool traits they might have. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and have a good day.